Welcome to anyone that's just joining us now. We are discussing moving out of academia into big technology. We have an excellent panel who have kindly agreed to join us now for a discussion on tips preparing for interviews. There's going to be some general discussion and questions, but perhaps I'm going to hand over to each of you for 5 minutes for any thoughts that you may have on this topic first, starting with you, James, if that's okay for you.
Okay, so I'm going to give just a super quick guide to interviewing at Microsoft. All of this is sort of available publicly on things like our career site. None of it's secret, but it's probably all hidden and it's hard to find. So, I think like, the process is pretty standard. I think we want to get you through the process as quick as possible. Unfortunately, often we're not very good at that, and it will take time. I think, as Gabriela said, it took several months. When I interviewed for Microsoft, it did take a couple of months to get everything done. But ultimately, you're going to have a technical phone screen or a loop with a screen with the hiring manager. You're going to talk to the recruiter about sort of all the nuts and bolts about visas and salary and all of that. Those two are completely separate. The hiring manager is not really going to care about any of that. At Microsoft, an interview loop is 4 people. There's typically somebody on the loop. It used to be called as appropriate when people came into the office, and you'd do 3 interviews and then they would decide whether or not they should have you talk to like a VP. We know everybody talks, especially as we went to Teams. One of the reasons with this is the interviewers will not talk to each other during the process. So all feedback's given blind into a tool. There's a feedback session a day or 2 afterwards where the hiring manager can see all the feedback, and then there'll be a discussion around. And that's usually where things like, oh, is this person leveled appropriately? Should they be up a level? Did they do amazing? Did they not? But this is the normal process. So the interesting thing is, even if you feel you had a bad interview, don't worry, just keep going. Like that's going to come up in conversation, and people will talk about it. What's an interviewer looking for? So I mentioned screening in. So at the bottom, there's a LinkedIn article by Kathleen Hogan, our VP of HR. And so this is all about like screen in, not screen out. We're not looking for this one special unicorn with this set of attributes. We're looking for what you have. And really, we're trying to recruit you. It's better for us. It's better for me if I can hire 3 more people onto my team. There's less work for everybody else to do. We can get things done more. So we want to hire you. So always think about, we're trying to find reasons to hire you. And as you're in an interview process, give us reasons. On a PM interview, it's mostly going to be competency-based interview questions. There might be some PM like problems. Designer X, what do you think about Y? So the equivalent of software engineering problems, but it's really mostly competency-based. And so again, competency-based is pretty standard. You can find any website out there that talks about competencies. Microsoft companies aren't special. They're just the same as everybody else.
Just to interrupt, to clarify here, PM refers to product manager, right?
Product manager, yeah, yes,
okay,
sorry. Yeah, product manager. So here you'll have less tech. You may have a technical loop. So there may be an engineering person on the loop if you're in it for a product manager role, because they want to see how you're going to work with the engineering team, but you're not expected to have deep software engineering background. But again, they would expect you to have some technical. And I think the other thing is sort of what we call our cultural attributes are key. So, you're going to get asked questions that lead into things like this. So the biggest one from Microsoft is growth mindset. We're looking for people who are learn it all, not know it all. We're looking for people who can go find problems, can think about it. Again, who are customer obsessed. One Microsoft. If a problem's worth solving, if you go to big tech, there's probably 3 teams all trying to solve it. One of the big skills is how do you bring all those people together to really solve it and to find the best solution. So you get asked questions that sort of lead into this. Like, tell me about a time you learned a new technology. Growth mindset. How did you really help a customer? Can you think of a time when somebody came to you with a problem, or where you thought about a problem before the customer came to you about it? Were you proactive? Like, you're just like, always think about, and it's probably the same, look at the marketing sites or the career sites, find these things, because this is what they're trying to ask you to answer. So if you can reorient your answers to talk about, not without saying, well, I have a growth mindset, but they're trying to find examples of this in your past. And it's not necessarily, I wrote this piece of code, but when I was working on this experiment, I did X is a great answer. So, I think always think about that. Think about how you can reframe your experience into what the career site is trying to tell you that they want to hear. And Microsoft's trying to hire you for who you are and what you bring. I think you should be your authentic self. You should find a role that fits you, and the best way to do that is not to pretend to be somebody else or to have different skills on what you have. Find a role that really fits you, I think, is the most important piece here.
Great, thanks very much indeed for that, James. Christina, I'd like to welcome you back now. Say a few words on this point, please.
Yes, thank you. So I would preface, I don't have slides. I would preface this talk by on interview tips. For me, the hardest part was to get to the interview, not the interview process per se. So I would like to give maybe a couple of pointers that may be helpful for other people. My first pointer that I wish that anyone had told me when I started to apply to tech was grit, develop grit. Be ready to be rejected 7 times by every single of the big tech companies. And that still does not mean that you're not a culture fit, that you're not a fit for the company, that you're not a fit for that role. It's just the process works that way. So be ready for that and normalize it. It's not really, don't take it personally. The second tip is your CV, your resume. I would say a few pointers here, try to make it visually pleasant, try to make it concise if you have especially less than 10 years of experience. Try to translate your specific experience to more lateral competences, or phrase it in a way that can be applicable to other companies outside of CERN in this case, for example. And when you apply to a position, use keywords for that position in your resume. It doesn't mean that you have to change your resume for every position organically, but sort of tailor it a little bit for each position. I think it works. And then once you get to an interview, I would say research the company, research the company values, be ready to ask questions when the interview arrives. That is ask questions to your recruiters, to the people that are going to be interviewing you, that are not going to be recruiters in the end. Have questions for them. It's a two-way process. Don't think about it as I am interviewing for them. It's it's a fit for both. You have to also be okay with working for them. So really, or working with them. So do that. And then the interview per se, I would say prepare, normally your recruiter, it's a very similar process to what James described for Microsoft, at Google. It's normally you go through phone screening and with a recruiter, and then one thing that was reassuring to me is you apply to a certain type of position. For example, at this stage, I asked my recruiters is this position what I should be applying to, or should I be applying to solutions consultant or something else? And that's a good part where you realize you're applying for the company as a whole, not for a position in particular, or not for a very niche. I'm applying to this software engineer role in Zurich and nothing else. Normally when they hire, they hire you as a candidate, and then if you're a better fit for this team or this other team, or that is organically coming through the interview process. Same with the level adjustment that James was describing before. And then when you are going through the interview process, I would say there's tons of materials. Don't underestimate the amount of material that is online to prep for tech interviews, whatever the role is. And it all it all helps, really. I had to do technical interviews, technical judgment interviews, non-technical interviews, and for me, for example, I had to pass a large system design interview, which I was not familiar with at all because it wasn't my field. And I did it all just based on internet information that is out there and it's open. So really use it. And there's many folks that have gone through it before, and it works. It really works. So do take a look at that. And then in general, I would also say do some work on your own experience and your own, have the typical interview questions. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? They may or may not come up, but if they come up, you want to have them ready. You don't want to arrive there with a super typical interview question and not have that ready. So And that also like sort of like helps your mindset as you're going through the interview. And I would also say have ready, like take your past experience and have some examples ready to storytell. Like I did this and like this is the way it went, right? Like this was the problem, this is the solution, this is the outcome, this is how we measure it. Like have a few examples when they ask about, tell me about a time you did this, which is a very typical question. Just have a few examples ready and a few like varied examples ready to demonstrate your different competences. And then I like also would say quantify as much as possible your accomplishments. These companies are like, at least Google and like my experience is like a very data driven company. So like if you can measure like that you like augmented like in, I don't know, like your performance like in this project like help like drive down sales by like, or drive up sales by like 20%, like whatever like quantification you can do really helps. Especially because certain projects, for example, are not necessarily like very familiar to people in big tech. So if you can say like, oh, like I enhanced data taking by this much or that much, that helps. And then I would like to finish like basically saying like what James said is like I resonate with a lot. Like don't pretend to be someone that you're not. And like if it's not a fit, it's for a good reason. Like if you're not fitting with the company culture, it doesn't mean that you're not going to fit later on. But if it's not a fit, it's also in your benefit. You don't want to work in a company that you're not a fit for. So look at it in that way as well. So I think that's pretty much it from my side.
Thanks very much for that, Christina. I'd like to echo that point. It's something I've heard before many times about the importance of, really trying to quantify and explain in clear terms, one's achievements, and making sure as well alongside that your specific contribution to those things are clear. Being really precise about these things is very helpful, particularly when you're playing in an area that is very different culturally to the one where you've previously been working. So I'm now going to hand over to you, Gabriele. Gabriele, if you would like to perhaps say a few words on interviews in big technology, please.
So the interview, as James said, it's pretty standard. There are 4 steps and a mix of skill-based and behavioral. For me, it took really long time from when I applied for the position. And I mentioned before that I completely forgot that I applied for it. And from when I got contacted by the recruiter, and I think it was in May, the beginning of May, I had my first interview probably a month after that, and it was with the hiring manager. And I think there was a challenge because most of my team is in the US, so we had also to find some common time. And after that, I think I had interview with actually my first interview, sorry, was with the principal researcher in my team. So it was partially technical and partially behavioral. And then I had with the hiring manager, and it was mostly behavioral. And after that, I had an interview with the director of security. I didn't know who he was, but it was kind of funny to know afterwards that I interviewed with the big boss. And I also asked me of technical and behavioral questions. And lastly, I had a technical interview with a senior researcher in my team. And after that, I got an offer, and it was in September. And then I started negotiating a bit. And this is something I would recommend always. Don't immediately accept your offer, but negotiate. Can be salary, can be location. For me, I negotiated my location, and after that, I started in December. I think I would just repeat what it's been said by the others, but that's my experience, and I can stop here.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Gabriele. That's fascinating what you say about negotiation, particularly in terms of, not just thinking about negotiation on salary, but on other points, as you mentioned in your case, location. Thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to hand over to Mariana.
Okay, so it's the same as James and Christina and Gabriela mentioned. So you can actually look at the careers page of Meta and see like how we interview, and there you will find that first you submit a resume, then provided your resume gets enough views, you will be called by the recruiter first. And if that interview goes well, so the first call with the recruiter is usually where they're trying to figure out what are your motivations for that role? Why did you apply for that role in particular? Is there any other role that might be a better fit? And depending on how that conversation goes, you either talk to the hiring manager for the role you applied for, or to different hiring managers. Then provided the phone screen works well, you will be invited to an on-site. Well, that used to be before the pandemic. Now they're all virtual. And as similar to Microsoft and Google, it's usually like 4 interviews. Depending again on the role that you apply to, it might be more software coding related, or more systems design related, testing related. It really depends on what the role is you're applying for. And after that, there's usually well, if you get an offer, then there's the call with the recruiter, and you discuss the numbers, and you can negotiate. One thing that I would like to point out is that when you have a recruiter to talk to, be really open to ask questions. They are usually your resource to answer questions like, where's the location? Who's the hiring manager? Can I talk to anybody? Is there anybody else on the team I should talk to? Or if you want to understand the culture better. Same with the interviews themselves. Usually the recruiter will be the one who will actually walk you through the different interviews that you're gonna have in the on-site, and what the focus is on each of those. They might even have resources in terms of look more into this topic, look more into that topic. Sometimes they're saying, you will get extra information. So while in my perceived experience, the recruiters tend to feel like gatekeepers before you're in that pipeline. Once you are in the interviewing pipeline, they're actually there to really support you and make sure that you are a candidate that is successful.
Thank you very much for that, Mariana. We've seen lots of agreement so far in this section, and I think that commonality can only be a good thing in terms of, all of you who are following today, that you see there are some key points that really do cut across different companies in this area. So Ritika, over to you for your thoughts.
Yeah. Speaking as someone who works at Apple, I feel like the interview process is the same. You have like 5 maybe rounds of interviews. Before that, you maybe speak to the hiring manager. The one thing that is starkly different from the other big tech companies is roles at Apple are unique to positions. So when you're interviewing for a specific team, for a specific role. At Apple, we don't hire like across the company. So when I was interviewing with 3 different teams, as if like I was interviewing with 3 different companies, and the recruiters did not share information with each other. And so I was free to fail in one of the interviews, which I did. And but the other 2 went like in the right direction. And at some point, they asked me if I was talking to any other recruiters at Apple or like any other teams at Apple. And so this one rule does not apply, where like Apple does not try to find the best fit for another role, but you are trying to interview for a particular role in a particular organization. As an interviewer myself, for software, I interview only software engineers. I typically spend 45 minutes to an hour with the candidates that I work with, and I tend to less dwell on the resume at hand. So I'll try to wrap that up, like just make the interviewee feel at ease, ask some questions about their life, and then just like straight move on to the technical part, because this is where I want them to succeed. There is no coming back from bad code. There's no coming back from a bad interview performance technically. So I feel like that has to be knocked in. That has to be 100%. And across your 5 interviews, the more locked in you are, the better your chance of hiring is. So it doesn't matter if you mess up in 1, maybe 2 is cutting it too close. And so try to like knock out every single one of them is my recommendation. Just like be on top of it. What I like to see is maybe 20-30 minutes of writing code. Explore the problem with me, ask me questions in return. When I'm presenting a problem, don't make assumptions. Come back and ask me, did you mean this? Or like, how do you want to think about this? Or like expand the scope of the problem. When you're writing code, write good code, clean code. Again, don't make assumptions. Maybe put a comment or two. Make it extensible, make it readable, all those good things. It's okay if you need help. I think that's normal at our jobs. We use Google all the time. So it's extremely normal to go look something up. And then I want to also talk about like, how do you test it? How do you run this thing at scale? Have you taken care of edge cases? Have you taken care of what happens when the process runs in a multi-threaded way, or like really specific questions relating to the problem at hand? So leave time for that. Let me be the one to end the interview. Don't let time run out. So I feel like time management is an important aspect that I see a lot of candidates struggle with. As someone who has interviewed at other companies, like I have literally interviewed across the board at all big tech, and otherwise, my experience has been, I feel again, timing is important. So when I was interviewing, I made sure that all my interviews were approximately in the same month. What that allowed me to do is get offers at the same time. And then I was able to pick and choose which one I wanted to work with and which one I didn't. And so that gave me options as what is best for my career, which companies may be paying me the best, which company feels like I have a future for the next 10 years, which team do I feel like I want to closely work with, what is the location that they're offering me, what are their benefits, or yeah, what do I care about at that point, right, in life? So I feel like if you kind of are going in, then maybe block out some time in your life, maybe 2 months, prepare really hard, and then spend another month just like interviewing everywhere you can. And I feel like that strategy really worked out well for me. I just blocked out like 3 months from my life and made it all about being successful at interviewing. I don't like it, but negotiations I feel are like fairly partial to people who are outspoken, but our industry is what it is, and there's nothing we can do about it alone. But do negotiate, don't undersell yourself. Mention if you have other offers. I also strongly recommend looking at, again, levels.fyi, looking at what other people are getting paid for the same job, maybe. And one of the important things I think someone mentioned before was you are interviewing the company as much as the company is interviewing you. Make sure you want to be there. While I was talking to my team, I realized I was interviewing actually for a position in Apple Park in Cupertino, and I really don't like California so much. And I was very split in my heart because I was like, oh, this team is amazing, but I don't want to move there. And while I was doing conversation, I realized, oh, my team's also in Seattle. And I was like, this is perfect. Now I don't have to say no. And so talk, just like find people to talk, like ask your recruiter to connect with your potential teammates, ask your recruiter to connect with more hiring managers if you have that option, and try to find like the best fit, because ultimately after you join, I feel like the first 6 months you want to have a really great experience, and that only depends on the people you work with. So yeah, you can catch up on like you already work at CERN, you're smart, you can catch up with everything else. So that would be my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ritika. We have 20 minutes now of discussion on this topic. I'm going to invite questions from the room. So again, you simply put your hand up and we'll ask those questions. But while you're thinking about those questions that you would like to ask, I'm going to first jump to the Q&A tool. And I am sorry, there's so many questions and there are really fantastic questions, but we can't get to them all. But to start by picking out the questions highlighted in the blue interview tips category, and I'm going to take them by order of upvotes. I'm going to start with a question here, which says, what tips can you give for software engineers with only a few years in software development to maximize their chances of getting into FANG companies? So Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, I don't think these specifically meaning just those companies, but in general, big tech companies. So it says, is there anything that isn't easily noticeable from the outside, or anything that, in your view, really packed a punch when it came to your interview?
Yeah, when I applied at Apple, I just had like 3 years of experience in software, which is not a lot. Speaking in software terms, like people I work with easily have like 20 years of experience. What helped me is, again, being like really confident, and having your technical preparation drilled down. I don't think like there's any way around it. So and showing some level of acceptance to learn is, I think, very important, because I think people people around you will teach you things. It's about, are you willing to accept it? Are you willing to take that feedback? Yeah, that's the thing you want to demonstrate in your interviews.
I mean, all of the big tech companies really over pivot on algorithms. Like, you just gotta know it. Like, you're not gonna use it during your day job, but you just gotta know it. You gotta go get the books. You gotta go study it. It's gonna take you a month. You gotta do leak code problems. You just gotta do it because that's what everybody else is doing. So there's a little bit of, if you're going for a software engineer, like Ritika said, you cannot fail the coding interview. Everything else is sort of optional and you might get a second chance, but and when I was running an engineering team, like my first interview question would be super, super simple. Like, reverse a list. Can you do it faster? Can you do it faster? Can you do it? And like, it's nothing, it's just 101, but the number of people who fail it, who just have not done the practice, just get the basics down. It'll also make you feel much better. Like, if you go in and you do a good coding interview, everything else is going to feel okay, but if you actually go, oh my god, I messed up the coding interview, like, the rest of the interview is going to be really hard for you. So just just got to do the work.
Thanks for that. What are the most common reasons for rejecting an applicant from academia?
I wouldn't say it's a reason to be rejected, but I would be careful in academia, at least in my experience. A lot was working by myself, sometimes reaching out to people, but putting my head down and just getting the work done. And working in industry is usually more of a collaborative thing. And when you interview, as Ritika pointed out, ask questions, ask clarifying questions. Be sure to not just make assumptions and think you have the best answer because you know it all. Be sure to ask clarifying questions and make it a conversation more than in an exam.
And another quick thing, if I can add, is don't try to be too theoretical. At the end of the day, the companies are trying to make money. and they want to see practical applications of everything that we can come up with. So if you come up with the best, I don't know, machine learning algorithm possible to detect something, it doesn't matter if you're not able to make it working in code, or if you're not able to implement it and actually run it on an iPhone or on a MacBook or something like that. So the practical aspect really, really matters.
So I'm now going to move over to questions in the room. I can see Andres, you've been waiting very patiently. So Andres, over to you for your question, please.
Thanks. First of all, I want to thank everybody for the time they're making to organize this and to come and speak. Very much appreciated. So a question I had was on how to actually get hooks to get actually an interview with one of the big tech companies. So my background is a software engineering background. I did my master's and I have a couple of years of experience, which is still very, very junior. And a couple of years ago, I tried to apply, and I had an old professor of mine who was working in Google Zurich, and I also wanted to work in Switzerland and preferably at Google. But I didn't get any interview. I tried twice, 3 times even. I made my own application. I was working to become an application developer. I made my own similar application to Google Calendar with drag and drop features and everything, but I couldn't get in, and I've heard good tips of making your resume stand out. Going to conferences, events. Is there something else?
Okay, so maybe I can take that. I would say I'm going to tell you this. I sent my resume to Google 7 times before I heard back from a recruiter. So 3 times is actually a pretty good average. And I know you're going to hear people. Yeah, I know you're going to hear people. So several things. You're going to hear people that get they just someone contacts them on LinkedIn or whatever. And it's like, hey, I have a job for you. That's amazing. Do not assume that's the status quo. I didn't assume it, and it didn't work that way for me. And I don't know that many people that were in that situation working at Google, seriously. So assume that you have to keep don't stop trying, right?
Being tenacious. Yeah.
Being honestly, it's also it's gonna help you once you enter the company, because not every initiative you're gonna try to implement is gonna go through. Sometimes you're gonna hear no, and then okay, let's try next month, or let's try another way. It's also good. I would also say some hubs are easier to get into than others. So for example, I know the visa situation was mentioned before, and I know you probably were applying to the Zurich hub, but depending on the positions, there are some hubs that are harder to get into than other hubs. So for example, the Dublin hub is easier to, or the Dublin hub, Poland has a hub now, and Munich are easier hubs to get into at Google at the moment than the Zurich hub. So for the same positions, and then it's a lot easier to ask for an internal mobility transfer later on than to maybe get into the hub. So consider that as well. And maybe you can, once you get an interview and once you get a hiring yes, you can, as several panelists were saying before, you can ask oh, is there a position to get hired at this other location? Or is there a position to transfer to this location? That's my end goal. And people are open to that, and some hiring managers are open to that. So don't discard it. My position now should have been in Dublin, and I'm in Zurich because I said I would prefer, is there a possibility? And they were yes. So I would say that too. But yeah, you have I think you can send 3 resumes per month. Do honestly, consider as well the macroeconomic circumstances change. When I got into Google, it was in a pandemic. So the amount of roles that were available, that's how I landed in site reliability engineering, although I didn't have anything to do with site reliability engineering, because that's the only job that was available at the moment, right? So consider that too. But I honestly encourage you to keep on trying. If you have any former professors, former contacts that can send you a referral, that might help, but don't take that as oh, I get in. You get equally rejected whether you have referrals or not, or equally accepted.
Yeah.
So hope that helps.
Keeping going at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Christina. I mean, I'd just like to add, I think this is something that is normal across almost all sectors now. You know, it's something I've seen myself in scientific publishing. It is normal for people, you know, you meet people if you're working at a particular magazine or wherever, a company, whatever, and they say, oh, yes, it took me, you know, 7 applications to get this role. It really is the norm. And the idea of being tenacious and hardy,
Yeah.
as you said earlier, is really important. I'm going back into the tool because I don't see anyone with their hand raised in the Zoom room. So I'm going back into the Q&A tool, and now I'm picking out some of the CV writing questions, because I think a lot of the discussion today has rightly been about interview technique. I think even more of the questions have been at that first stage. This picks up on what Andres was just asking, and some of the questions in here about, you know, how to really make yourself stand out at that first stage, because that can be very challenging for people. The question that I wanted to ask here is, what qualifications are unique or at least common to help you know, high energy physics people highlight themselves in their resumes? So in other words, what tips do you have specifically for people from HEP backgrounds in terms of standing out from the crowd? Because I can see that there are going to be some you know, difficulties in terms of, you know, communicating certain skills. We talked about the language and making sure that things are put in the right language, but presumably there are also some advantages that, you know, people can point to from their time at CERN. So do any of you have any tips on that? You know, how can people coming from CERN and other academic institutions help themselves stand out from the crowd?
I think one thing, you know, that is still common, people still think that CERN is cool. You know, that working at CERN is cool. And you have to work out how you highlight that. You know, the very typical conversation based in the US, I worked at CERN, and they go, oh, really? The particle collider, you know, Large Hadron Collider. And like 3 steps in, they go, oh, there, that's amazing. So you're trying to highlight that. You know, you don't say CERN, I worked on the largest physics experiments in the world where we discovered the Higgs boson. Like, give them the words that they're going to know from popular science so that they can then relate, and they go, oh, that's interesting. That's going to make your CV stand out. But if it just says CERN, it's another acronym.
Yeah,
And there's a US company called Cerner whose stock symbol is CERN. So, you know, you could be completely the wrong way as well. So, yeah.
Yes, the existence of that company makes some of tracking our news coverage online very tricky. But yes, no, that's a really good point. As a communications officer, I would just like to highlight the number of times that I'm speaking to people from the general public or policymakers, and you know, it's when you use those words, Large Hadron Collider, Higgs boson, that people's ears pick up and they realize what you're talking about. That happens time and time again. So I really do echo that James just said. And now on to the next question. I realize I'm rattling through them, but there are a lot of great questions to get through. How can one put value onto their programming interests that aren't certified? You know, if you're applying for a job and you have some programming skills, but they've not been certified, how can you show that? And is that of value at all in your application?
If you're applying for a software engineering role, and if you have software engineering skills, one thing that can help is having like a GitHub repo that is publicly available, and people can just check what kind of code does this person write, and is it actually good? Does it make sense? Is it chaotic? And that's definitely a good thing to have if you don't have certifications.
I think that's a really good you know, practical tip you've given there, Mariana. And then that links actually to the most popular question on the Q&A tool related to certification. They ask, can you advise about big tech certifications, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, Linux, K8, etc.? So if you had to take one, which one would it be and why? I'm adding the why. Do any of you have any thoughts
I would
on that?
give the counterpoint. I don't look at certifications. Like, you know, the certifications we do for our end user trainings, like, yes, you can do them all, you can click through them. I don't look at, like, I think an anti-pattern if somebody comes with a huge amount of certification. What we're looking for is experiences. So again, to Mariana's point, like, hey, I wrote this, what did I do? It's here on GitHub. Why did I do it? What happened? You know, treat it again like one of those behavioral questions. Why did I write it? What was the outcome from it? Where is it going to go? You know, because that's so much more important. I think like certifications can be back into not into the theoretical realm a little bit.
Okay, so moving on to the next question that I see here. There's one more in the chat on CV writing. As a reminder, those in the Zoom room, stick your hand up if you have a question. So this question here says that, you know, tech companies advertise lots about technology jobs, naturally. But what about administrative roles? I'm an instructional designer and have to develop online training, mostly with low-code tools or in JavaScript, Tin Can API. But I sometimes feel like there's no job opportunities for me anywhere. So perhaps we can broaden that question slightly. What about, you know, non-technical roles? You know, there's going to be lots of people that are joining the call today from CERN that have non-technical roles. You know, there's lots of people at CERN who are doing technical jobs, but there's also lots of people like myself that do things like, you know, communication, HR, legal, etc., etc. What about those people and positions at you know, large technology companies? Do you have any specific advice for them, perhaps?
I don't have specific advice except that there are tons of jobs like that. I'm pretty sure as many engineers there are in the company, there are non-technical people supporting those engineers, because we cannot be successful alone. And I don't have specific tips as to like how you can find them, but like one way is just apply, because you are definitely not going to get the job if you don't apply for it.
Thanks, Ritika. And Mariana, I think you perhaps have something to say on this point too.
Yes, I would suggest also widening your search in terms of what is it you do. You can, for instance, search these keywords on other people's LinkedIn profiles and see what roles they hold. And that might help you find actually the term that is used in the industry to describe that role. Because maybe if you look for specific names for the role that you're using at CERN, it might not be what it's called in the industry. So I don't know, that job, for instance, sounded like learning and development as the area in the company. So if you can look more in that area, it might be helpful.
Thank you, Mariana. We've just got 3 minutes left, but I can see another person with the hand up in the room, so I'm going to move away from the live Q&A tool and to that question in the room. Mario, over to you to ask your question, please.
Hello, thank you very much for the interesting talk today, and especially Ritika and Mariana, considering the time difference. One question that I have is, many times in academia, a very good way, let's say, to gauge the research and the expertise is by publications, right? Especially in journals or really good conferences. Do you think that publications are valuable to hiring managers, or do you have any experience with that, especially you, Mariana, since you came from a PhD background? Thanks.
Thanks for the question. So I think it depends, again, on the role you're applying for. There are roles at big tech companies that are called research scientists and research engineers. And I think for those roles in particular, it is interesting what the people have done, where they've published, what their work was. And for these roles in particular, usually an additional step in the interviewing process is giving a little talk about your research. But again, that's for a specific type of role. If you're looking for general software engineering roles, then it will probably be less important.
Yeah, and sometimes some teams, if you look up each of the tech companies, they write so many papers. And if you look those people up, like I know people at Apple who write these papers, and their titles are not necessarily research scientists or like something, but it might be just a general software engineer. So if you have that skill and there's some team which kind of values it, you might make the perfect fit. So I would not discard that.
So before we do that, before I hand over to Rachel, I'd just like to say thank you again to our panelists. I'd like to take a moment to summarize some of the discussion that we've had so far today. You know, at least in my view, it's been a fantastic discussion. I feel like we could have continued talking for hours. I hope that was the case for many of you following too. whether that was the case or wasn't, we're keen to have your feedback so that we can further hone these events. I think, in the first session where we had our introductions from each of the panelists, we really did learn about just quite how different the way of operating can be for those in big technology companies compared to in academia. But I think it was very reassuring for all of us to hear that, the need for adaptation is understood and that time is given for that. When it comes to applying, it seems that there is a good understanding of role dependency when it comes to academic success markers. So in some cases they might be really relevant, in some cases not so much, and it's an important skill of yours to understand when these will and when these won't be of less relevance. We talked a little bit about the importance of developing general skills on top of one's sort of deep technical knowledge, having general skills that will allow you to communicate well in your teams, building consensus. That was a key word that came up again and again, and these are important skills not to be overlooked. I think that's something that's acknowledged here at CERN too, but of course that's very important in these large technology companies. We talked, as I said, a lot about language, and then we went on to talk a little bit about visas and some of the issues around, geographical differences, cultures, and so on and so forth. And I think, from some of the messages I've received in the chat, that's something that people are keen to discuss further about in the networking sessions. I think we also heard in that first section that some of the real advantages of going to work for big technology companies are threefold. They are variety in terms of the roles available to you, scale in terms of seeing the scale of what you do, the size of these companies, and thus linked to that scale, the impact that you can then have on people's daily lives. Ritika mentioned, iCloud. That's something that I'm using, several times a day. I think I'm probably using, James, tools that you've developed as well. All of you here, Christina with Google and the networks, we're reliant upon services that you provide for all of us to live our daily lives. So it must be fantastic knowing that you're having such a concrete impact on the world. And then, of course, afterwards, we've just finished now our discussion of interview tips. As I say, I hope you've all been taking notes. I know that I have. I don't pretend that I'm going to be able to summarize this, perfectly, but I think, some really key messages have come through, in terms of, working to get over that first step, remembering that, that CVs are important. Covering letters, perhaps less so, but making sure that you're speaking the right language, that you are tailoring your CVs to the application in question, that you understand that it's normal that you may submit a CV several times to a particular company before you hear back from them, that you understand that these recruitment processes can be quite long because of the scale of companies like this. It's a little bit different to startups, where it is normal and you shouldn't worry too much if the whole process does take 6 months. If people want you, they will wait. I hope that's fair what I'm saying. At least that's what came through to me from your discussions. But of course, everyone acknowledges that, rejection in any part of life is hard, right? And so it's normal that it can feel tough if you're sending off CVs and not hearing back. So it's about working to understand that process and not to take that personally. Be yourself when you're applying for these positions. Really work to find the right roles for you. It's about a matchmaking exercise, and the size and diversity of these kind of companies mean that you will be able to find roles that suit your skill sets well. So it's important to really be yourself. James talked in particular about screening in, not screening out. I think that's probably an important thing for everyone to remember. If they get to the interview stage of the process, and then this idea of having a growth mindset. This is something again that you talked about, James, but I heard others allude to it today, and I've heard others speak about it in the past at similar kinds of events. This idea of showing that you're someone who is inquisitive and ready to, you know, learn it all and not know it all, you know. And I think hopefully, you know, many people here today have a scientific background, and that idea of, you know, wanting to learn and being really keen to do so is something that's probably driven many of us to the careers we have today. So hopefully that will serve people well as they go forward in these kinds of processes. Thank you again to our panelists for the fantastic discussion, and thank you to all of you for A, coming, B, staying so long, and C, asking such fantastic questions.